like what Jesus of Nazareth done. Why would you have something like that standing in the middle of your building? I don't understand this. Oh, maybe I do. It's an instrument of torture. Execution. It was used throughout the Mediterranean world, but you know, the Romans, they really perfected it very well. Sometimes it was merely a stake in the ground in which the victim was impaled. Sometimes it was a cross piece that was placed on top of a stake that was buried in that rocky, hard ground there in Palestine. And other times it was like that. 2 pieces together. Way at the very, very top of that was where the inscription was nailed. Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. The up and down portion that you see there was usually, at least in Palestine, buried and embedded in the ground. It never moved from that spot. The doomed prisoner was then forced to carry merely the cross piece, if you will, to that site of his crucifixion. A kind of double indemnity, for crying out loud. I mean, not only are you going to die in the most cruel and fashionable way, but you had to carry the instrument of your own death? I mean, wow. Prisoners then nailed to that cross piece, and then with him nailed to that piece, all of that is lifted high and put on the stake in the ground. The Romans called the up and down portion of the cross the staticulum, meaning simply stationary, because it stayed there. The cross piece was called the portabellum, simply meaning portable. That's what the prisoner carried to the site of crucifixion. It was that heavy load that they made first Jesus carry, and then drafted me to finish the trip. Yeah, I was visiting Jerusalem for Passover, of course, that day. You see, I'm from northern Africa, from the city of Cyrene. Today, that city is on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea in what you will call now Libya, okay? We had quite a large Jewish population living there at the time. And I had journeyed to Jerusalem for Passover on many occasions before. But for some reason or other, I just had to be there that year. Little did I know that the real reason for which I was there was to serve Him, my Lord and Master. I had heard the babbling of the crowd outside the inn where my boys and I were staying at the time. We heard all the shuffling of the hooves on the pavement of all the sheep paraded down to the temple to be certified as proper Passover lamb. I suspect that the crowd, though, was a little different that morning than I remember in past. These were shouts of indignant people. They were aroused by the commotion of all that was happening there in Jerusalem. Of course, my boys, they wanted to get out and see what was going on. Could you blame them? Curiosity being what it is.
You look funny.
You probably don't see me smiling, but I am. I mean, who could subdue their curiosity? Could I tell them, you gotta stay in the room, and keep quiet? No, of course. We wanted to get outside and see what was going on. Well, it was a bright, clear morning, but the ugly sounds of that crowd did not match the beauty of the day. Before long, we saw this Roman procession of prisoners being crucified, and Jesus carrying his cross. and 2 others that were going to be executed with him. The jeering crowd made that procession very difficult to motor through Jerusalem. And of course, the load they were each carrying was no easy matter either. The man stumbled at my feet. The timber fell to the stony pavement below. Besides, this man, whose name I later learned was Jesus of Nazareth, there were 2 others bearing the same loads as he. They, though, were hard-looking criminal types who uttered curses to the crowds, and especially their executioner, the Romans. But what did the Romans expect of this Jesus, for crying out loud? I mean, he had been up all night, and at the command of Pontius Pilate was scourged that morning. And then, of course, they put these spiky branches kind of thing on his head. Blood was going down his brow, obscuring his sight. And then his own robe and so forth tangled in his feet and so forth. And he falls. I mean, how could they expect him to manage the portobello with all of that? Well, whether it was compassion or simply expediency on the part of the Romans, they drafted me to finish the procession. I ended up carrying that cross to the execution site. I could have protested. Oh, sure. But what was a Jew to do against the armed Roman, right? I thought of my sons, but they were old enough to pay for themselves, so it was no matter if I was gone for a couple hours. And perhaps I could have found a worthy some other kind of excuse, but I really could not ignore this man's need. Now, I'm a fairly strong man, but I have done many heavy jobs throughout my life. But I have to tell you that that weight of that cross was exorbitant. And not so much because of the wood and the massiveness of it all, but just the thought of understanding what it was going to be used for emotionally hit me. What a horrible and merciless way to die. So I bore the cross. I could not help but think of Jesus, who not only had to carry it, but would soon be carried by it. Because he would be nailed to what my shoulders were carrying. All the horror of what was happening flooded my mind at that moment, and I felt this searching pity for him. How could this be? And yet as I struggled with the beam, he seemed to take pity on me. You know, I can't describe how he looked at me. Kind of compassion, maybe? Or maybe it was simply relief. You know, he didn't have to carry it anymore, right? There seemed to be a kind of attitude of thanks on his part for the assistance that I was providing. It was as if he was saying to me that bearing my cross was a necessity, and that he would repay me for my trouble with something more than material blessings. Was it hope he gave me? He would soon be dying. So what was the hope there? He had nothing to look forward to but bitter anguish. So was he giving me hope or consolation or what? I couldn't tell you. Or was it just the assurance that in the face of all this difficulty, he could still provide strength through it all? Well, I don't know quite how to word it, actually. All I can say is, I knew that cross-bearing is hard. Okay? It's a lonesome task that you don't ever want to do. And yet when we look beyond our crosses and all the possibilities that our life may take, you and I can still see hope. My sons and I, there on Golgotha, were horrified at the brutality of crucifixion. We learned that this Jesus was no thief, robber, murderer, or insurrectionist like the others. We didn't understand why he was being crucified. The other two, oh yeah, and the one they released in his place, that Barabbas, they were notorious criminals. And we can understand why Rome wanted to take the revenge they took. But there seemed to be no justice when it comes to Jesus' crucifixion. A kind of profaning of the commandments, if you will. A violence against the sanctity of life and innocent life. But what did the Romans care about innocent or guilt? If you got in their way, they got rid of you as quickly and as expeditiously as possible. You know, looking back now, I was there to celebrate the Passover, okay? And it is always a celebration of a very distant event, where us Jews would slaughter a lamb and then paint the doors, posts of our houses with blood, and eat that lamb that night for Passover. We were told the death angel, was going to cross over Egypt. And every house that did not have the blood on the doorpost, the firstborn son would die. Well, as I'm standing there at the crucifixion site, it occurred to me that the death angel was coming again. Only this time, not to strike the firstborn male of her household, but the firstborn and only Son of God. So that his blood was splashed on the cross now, instead of the doorposts of our homes. We would be spared eternal death. You see now, the Lamb of God, the Passover Lamb of all those years, would now save all of our descendants who trusted in him. And his blood splashed now on the hearts and lives of his people. You see, more than a crucifixion took place that day. More than death happened. I would say the impossible happened. Because while Jesus died on Friday, he was alive again on Sunday. I saw him die. One doesn't get a spear thrust up your side and survive that, will you? I also saw him after his resurrection. And I knew he was truly the one for whom I bore his cross. You know I could tell? His eyes. Those same blazing, fire-lit eyes that gave me hope only a couple days before, when everything else seemed to be defeated. Is that not beauty of the fulfilled faith you and I have in Jesus Christ? We need not only look at the immediate pain and agony of crosses that we bear. We can look beyond to the conquest that you and I will acquire. We can anticipate victory through it all. No matter how arduous the climb up our individual Golgothas may be, you and I can see the light of the cross leading us on to a deathless life. Yes, deathless life. I submit to you that's much better than a lifeless death, is it not? You grow weary under the burdens of the cross of the illness, say? Look to Jesus, and there is hope to be had. You will stumble because of the weighty crosses of family issues and difficulties. Take courage and strength in the compassion and understanding that our Lord provides. You who struggle and fall under the oppressive weight of whatever cross you are bearing, uncertainty or the future or whatever situation you might be in, you can know that the light of the cross of Jesus Christ there at Golgotha can help you look beyond the darkness of your immediate situation to a resurrection and new life that will be ours forever. Oh yes, we may stumble, just as Jesus did, under the weight of his own cross. But you know, his promised Holy Spirit picks us up and helps us to continue toward those Golgothas, assuring us every step of the way, victory is ours. You see, being Christian does not mean we are without trials. Oh, no, no, no. We are, however, encouraged by the Master to see our moments of anguish as a sacrifice under the hand of God and can become joyous. Yes, joyous. In the noblest kind of way. You see, the significance of that cross is not what it did for Jesus. No. It's what it does and did for you and me. Jesus' cross can teach us to see our burdens as a blessing. To look for the ways by which they too will glorify God. Isn't that what Jesus said about his cross? Once in a lifetime, you may be called out to the streets of life to do something really worthwhile, but unexpected, I grant you. Many unfortunately rebel. Some walk away from it. Others would do almost anything else but lift a finger to help Jesus bear his load. I could have done much the same, but I'm so glad I didn't. I'm glad the soldier grabbed me to serve my Lord. Others may well have, who likewise serve Jesus, are really equally glad they do as well. So, will you? If you willingly lift the timbers of heartache and difficulty and carry them to the moment of crucifixion, so that out of the grave may new life arise, a new hope and a new faith that our Jesus provides. There are needs and challenges all around us. And they're all trying to pull us into the service, to share and to carry some of those burdens. Will you be receptive to that command to share in bearing that cross? Because regardless of who it is that calls you for help, it is really an invitation from God himself. So, will you carry your cross? Or will you push your way through this crowd seeking some way or manner of escape and miss the greatest opportunity you will ever have to serve Jesus? Remember, Jesus does not give us the choice of picking out our cross, does he? He says, pick it up. Having chosen the cross you and I are to carry already. So, will you? Any questions for Simon? Please.
When did they stop using crucifixion?
If my memory serves me correct, about 150 or 200 AD. Okay? Yes?
I actually have 3 questions.
Okay.
One, what would have happened if you could not have carried the cross for Jesus? I mean, what, would they have picked somebody else?
Probably, yeah. I mean, they picked me out of the crowd, so they would have just grabbed somebody else. Yeah.
Okay, number 2, how far, or how many miles or whatever, did the cross have to be carried to the execution site?
From the Praetorium, which is Pilate's courtyard, okay, to the site of crucifixion is about under a mile. It's about 7/10 of a mile. I walked that route myself, literally speaking, all right, in Jerusalem. It's called the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering, okay? But 7/10 of a mile.
And one more question.
Go shoot.
Okay, I know the Lord was nailed to the cross. The 2 guys that were on the cross beside him, were they nailed or were they tied to the cross?
Good question. Now, you see me as a pretty hefty kind of guy, right? For the Romans, they would always weigh up the size of the person they're crucifying. most always they were nailed first. And if they were the hefty guy like I am, they would often be tied as well. You know why? Romans don't want guys falling off the crosses because then they have to put them back up there again. Okay? So many of your artists will show the malefactors dying with Jesus being tied. I don't know what they were, actually. Chances are they were both, if their body size was mine. Okay? Romans didn't want to do a job over. Do it right the first time, be done with it, right?
If you're nailed up there, you're not going to come down anyway.
Sometimes they do. It would pull through the hand, and then the body would flop over. You see? And Romans didn't like that. You have a question?
No.
You put your hand up.
Scratching.
You're scratching? Okay, we'll scratch the Lord. All right. We go on with that. Please, go ahead.
You said that you saw Jesus afterwards. What did you see?
According to tradition, Simon of Cyrene saw him in Galilee. Okay? But again, this is non-biblical material, so the truth or reliability of that always is of question. But that's what tradition says.
Does it say that he came to see you? Or that you were in a crowd somewhere else?
Just that he saw Jesus in Galilee. Now, what the circumstances was as far as that meeting, we're not told. There's no word. Way back there.
Why did they pick you to carry the cross for Jesus?
That's a good question. I think they just kind of grabbed me because I was close. It's kind of like the burdens you and I carry. I mean, why do you get asked to serve in this capacity or that? You're there. You're in the immediate vicinity. And they say, hey, help! I mean, it's like driving down the highway and a car has an accident right in front of you. You stop and make sure everybody's better. Why? Why did the people that drove past that before or after not stop? Well, they weren't there close. Right? A lot of times it's vicinity. If you're close, you get asked.
That makes sense, but what if you were in a crowd, right?
Yeah.
So there was other people.
Yeah, right, exactly.
What if you were like in the middle?
Well, that's a good question. But part of the reason, that I may have been selected, my skin, what color is Simon of Cyrene from northern Africa? What's the color of his skin?
Black.
Probably black. Yeah. And so maybe if it were done today, that would be a racist kind of reaction. Oh, let's grab the black guy. He can do it. You see? So I don't know. I don't know why they chose me. But I probably was a darker skinned person than most in the procession. Okay? Please.
I always thought Simon was like a giant because I could picture him carrying the full cross, the center post and the cross piece.
Yeah.
But basically all he carried was the cross piece.
Correct.
Oh.
Right. Yeah, most crucifixions in Palestine carried merely the cross piece because the other piece was embedded in that rocky ground and left there. And then we simply hoist up the cross piece with the guy nailed to it, hook it to the up and down portion, and then nail his feet. That was it. Yeah.
So all this time, I've been thinking that Jesus carried the entire cross.
Probably not happening.
Actuality was just the bar.
Correct.
Cross.
That's why, now think about this. If Jesus is tied, and see, this is another reason why they're often tied and nailed, because they're carrying the cross piece already with their arms already tied to that bar. Right? By the time you get to Calvary's site, that's when the nails go in. So why take the ropes off? Right? But here's the point I want to make. If Jesus is carrying this cross piece tied to his arms, like I was describing, and he falls, what's going to stop his fall? Not a thing. he is going to fall flat on his face. Bang! Right? Ouch! Yeah. Way back there.
When you said that it was emotionally heavy when you were carrying the cross, what did you mean by that?
Well, I meant by that is because I knew what this apparatus that I was carrying was going to be used for. I mean, we're not talking picnic here, right? Right?
Right.
This piece of wood is not going to be used for a family gathering where we can put our food and our Kentucky Fried Chicken on. Okay? This is going to impale a man and cause his death. Man, can you imagine the emotion that I carried then? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Any other things about... You now know more about Simon and Cyrene than you ever have in your life. What do you think about that, huh? Yeah, exactly. All right. We go on with our service. We'll receive the offering, and then I'll get down and get prayer requests.